Okay, welcome everyone to the certification programs track sessions. My name is Juan Gonzalez from Teron Labs in Australia, representing the Southern Hemisphere, and I'm very happy to present the next speakers for the next two sessions. So the first session is on the CMVP program updates, and we have we have David Hawes, Calis, and Kailai Chen. Kailai is going to talk first. Okay.
Well, good morning. Welcome to the SCMC 2024, and welcome to the CMVP program update. We have two presentations. One this kind of explains the CMVP current, and we have this next session we'll look into the future. My name is Kailai Chen, currently assumes the role of program manager at CCCS, and joining me are Dave Hawes, program manager at NIST, and Calis, deputy program manager at NIST. Okay. So what we'll do today is to give you a very high-level view of the program, and this is a standard portion of the presentation if you've ever seen it in the past SCMC. These slides, I do have to run them through. They are primarily for those folks who are new to CMVP, so I just want to highlight some very high-level information about the program and FIPS 140-3 standards. And then we're going to go highlight some recent activities implemented in the program this year. And we'll touch on PQC and the ISO. And then we're going to spend a significant amount of time to provide a update of our program queues. Okay. So CMVP, our mission is to provide assurance of the security and technical quality of cryptographic modules employed by federal agencies in both the US and Canada, and employed by the industry. And we do this by developing cryptographic module standards, researching and developing test methods and validation criteria, and working with accredited cryptographic security testing labs. The CMVP is managed together by the CCCS and NIST. Staffing-wise, currently we're looking at a 9-member team at NIST and a 5-member team at the CCCS. So a total of 14, a small team, considering how many activities we need to support. So in addition to cryptographic module submission review, we work with NavLab to support lab audits and accreditation. We work with Pearson VUE and manage the CVP tester exam. We continue to improve module review capabilities. We develop implementation guidance for areas where requirements may be subject to interpretation, and many other activities to support this operation. So when we talk about standards, of course, we're referring to the FIPS 140-3 standard, which is security requirements for cryptographic modules. And this standard was developed based on ISO 19790 2012 version and ISO 24759 2017, which provide security requirements and testing requirements for the modules, respectively. In order for CMVP program to accept cryptographic module for validation, 800-140 documentation series were developed. These documents modify the test evidence requirements and vendor evidence requirements specified by ISO 24759. 800-140 specifies the modification of the test requirement for 140-3. It modifies the test evidence and vendor evidence requirements of ISO 24759. 148 modifies documentation requirements the vendors must provide to labs to demonstrate conformity. 140B specifies security policy requirements and provides the security policy structure and formatting guidance. So here, there you saw the list of documents. You can check out those documentations on the CMVP website. Approved security functions, approved SSP generation and establishment methods are captured in 140C and 140D. For example, you find FIPS standards such as block ciphers, AES FIPS 197, digital signature standard FIPS 186-5 in 140C. You find 56A Rev 3 or 856A Rev 3 recommendation for pairwise key establishment schemes using discrete logarithm in 140D. So both 140C and 140D were recently updated to include the recently published 3PQC standard. In addition to the 140 documentation series, the CMVP provides programmatic guidance pertaining to the FIPS 140-3 test requirements used by the labs to test a cryptographic module's conformance to the standard. This is a document available on the CMVP website, namely FIPS 140-3 IG document. Additionally, we receive specific questions from the labs, the vendors, and other interested parties concerning whether a specific implementation meets the standard or not. And these are RFGs, a request for guidance. And we do our best to respond promptly. And in fact, we have been leveraging expertise from the industry through CMVP to help us on some really technically complex questions. We work closely with NIAP, who accredits the labs. NIAP stands for National Voluntary Laboratory Accreditation Program. The labs are responsible for testing cryptographic modules' conformance to the FIPS standard. NIST Handbook 150 and 150.17 stipulate requirements for which the labs must meet to demonstrate they operate an appropriate management system. They are technically competent, and they are able to generate technically valid results. The CMVP supports the NavLab assessors to periodically conduct lab audits to ensure that the labs remain compliant to the handbook requirements. And as of today, there are 20 labs worldwide. We have 10 in the US, 2 in Canada, 3 in Europe, 4 in Asia, and 1 in Australia. The validation of cryptographic modules relies on the support and the good work from the accredited labs who work with the vendors, conduct module testings, develop test reports. So it's essential for the program to collaborate with the labs. Now, speaking of collaboration, there's plenty of it. NIST and the CCCS, the 2 program offices, we collaborate on a daily basis at every level of the issues. Collaborating with the labs is essential. And there's a collaboration with the subject matter experts from the vendors and the users through CMVP, Cryptographic Module Users Forum, who help shape guidance for many technical issues. Collaboration with NCCOE, Automated Module Validation Project. We, the CMVP, are looking forward to seeing the outcome of this project, and we'll see how it can be applied to the program. NIAP, there's certainly possibility to collaborate on the entropy front. And here at SMC, this is where the program meets and learns from everyone. And we look forward to seeing many presentations and meet many of you in this week. Right, recent activities. So there are 3 activities perhaps more significant than others related to specific to cryptographic module reviews. FIPS 140-3 documentation TEs. TE stands for technical evidence. There are over 200 requirements. Such requirements fall into two groups. One group requires testers to verify presence of information and the information accuracy from vendors' documentation. And the other group requires testers to verify statements based on information from vendors' documentation. We have observed inconsistencies in the assessment information submitted over the years. Hence, we issued the guidance to standardize how this assessment information should be submitted. Effective September 1st, submissions shall follow the guidance. And the goal is to improve information quality, remove information duplication, hence help the review of the assessment information of these TEs during the module review activity. The other significant activity that aims to improve information quality is the deployment of SP 800-140B R1. This capability is essentially a whole new submission process with many new system elements. For example, Web Cryptic BR1, Security Policy Builder, Module Information Structure Verifier, etc. What's important is that the module submissions submitted through these tools and this process, we can be sure of the information quality. Because, one, the tools operate based on well-defined information structure. And second, the submission process ensures information is extracted from a single source. The information quality of SP 800-140 BR1 compliant security policy is a lot better than that of pre-BR1. So pre-BR1 modules we qualify those ones are the modules before January 1st, 2024. Additionally, this new process or capability is integrated with the CMVP and include with the CMVP certificate information so that test algorithm certificates can be retrieved from CMVP and included in the BR1 security policy. So this further helps the review of a module submission. The third activity is the interim validation. Modules submitted prior to January 1st, 2024 qualify for the interim validation. Validated modules will have a 2-year sunset date during which the vendors have the option of submitting a 140BR1 compliant submission to extend the sunset date to 5 years. And we'll provide an update on where we are later in this presentation. Okay. At this time, I'll pass you over to Alex, who will provide an update on the implementation guidance and other topics.
All right. Thank you, Kailai. So I think we structured our slides so that, that very end of the presentation is probably the most interesting, but I'm kind of smack in the middle. So I'll do my best to make this as, not boring as possible. All right. So as far as, guidance goes, we work on the implementation guidance, the IG, and since last ICMC in 2023, we've gotten a handful of new IGs up there, the 4 of them binding and embedding modules, legacy algorithms, and the 2 separate IGs on the 800-208 standard. One kind of giving well, I could use this thing. So one used for better definition of what some of the requirements are and better interpretation of the 800-208 requirements, and then also permitting an allowance for vendor affirming one of the algorithms, the HSS algorithm within that standard. Based off the fact that there's LMS testing available, and there's a lot of assurances that you can get from getting that LMS testing on your HSS implementation. So as far as updates to IGs, we've done a lot of those over the last year as well. Counted over 25 of them of different IG updates throughout the year, and And I kind of just grabbed a couple here, for them just to kind of give you a sense of some of the bigger changes. The first one, the self-test requirements. So we have an IG that pretty much captures all of the algorithm self-test, requirements, and so we've worked over the last year to look at the post-quantum algorithms and what the self-test requirements ought to be defined for that. We've been able to work with the CMUF working group or CMUF forum and collaborate well there as far as getting feedback from the community on those self-test requirements, as well as working with other streams, other forums, the post-quantum algorithm forum that NIST hosts as well. As far as some other changes, we had the 9.3a entropy updates. We were looking to point to the ESV, requiring ESV when the entropy source is within the operating environment. So that's that's been a requirement in a sense up to this point, but we kind of made it a more sort of comprehensive. If your entropy source is within the operating environment, it ought to be able to be ESV testable, and it should be a certificate associated with that. But of course, with that comes a transition. It's kind of a step away from, precedence, which was, in some cases allowing sort of an entropy caveat for those. So there's a transition for that, and that should be January 1st of 2026 is when that officially kicks in. And then we also had sort of an update to 4.1a, on introducing the sort of lock-based authentication concept as a model. You unlock your module. You authenticate to your module, you unlock sort of its services, and then it kind of basically doesn't necessarily have strong understand. Basically, the services are available to the different operators, but we wanted to make sure we sort of limit the understanding of that and provide the necessary caveats for that as well. And then some other IG updates based off of the transition to 186-5, there's a transition in February of this year. So I'm spending too long on this, so let me go faster. All right, so as far as manager manual updates, we published several versions. The last one, in December of last year, we got a final version in there. It was a draft version before that. Some accommodations we included were some, permitting some specific, limited changes into a that module could have some, code updates while still in the queue, while still being, post-submission, and we're looking at it as far as the review goes. We're still allowing some code changes, so we can address, so that, vendors can address vulnerabilities and CVEs and bug fixes and those sort of things, so that, the final validation actually is, a better secure module for purchase. We introduced better RFG template. Kailai mentioned around the request for guidances we received. We introduced revalidation scenarios with some limited combinations based off a lot of feedback from the community. And we also introduced on August 13th of this year, just last month, a manual revalidation option where we can basically, support things like rebranding and OE updates and those sort of things as part of the FIPS 140-3 process. Of course, we say manual here because our systems are still being updated to be, a better streamlined approach, but we wanted to make sure we considered, the shorter term sort of issue with that approach and waiting for, formal system updates for that. And we also, formalized a remote lab testing of modules. So it's a accommodation we supported in that release. And there's some other examples in February, April updates as well. So, all right. So the last slide I think I'll talk about is that's not true. I have one more. So this one is the post-quantum algorithms. Obviously, you guys have heard quite a bit about that. The publication of those FIPS 203, 204, and 205 algorithms, the MLChem, the MLTSA, and SLH-DSA algorithms. I think something we're very excited about. Working with, with the different groups working on post-quantum, we were able to, both the CMVP and CAVP were both able to get, support for these algorithms the same day that those standards were actually published. So on August 13th, we both got our programs ready for those submissions. Whether it's testing the CAVP, testing the post-quantum algorithms, or whether it's our own CMVP updates necessary to include the algorithms within our own approved security function SPs. And obviously I mentioned the update to the IG. And then as far as our involvement with ISO activities in general, just when I say our involvement, I'm just speaking of CMVP specifically. There's a lot of involvement with other areas of NIST, with a lot of different working groups within ISO, but just from the CMVP's perspective, where Carolyn French is the lead editor for the 197 INO, next version of that document, and also an editor for the 24759 document. So those are obviously the, well, I shouldn't say obviously, but those are the standards that the CMVP points to as far as defining the module requirements. And then myself and Ben Livesberger is also part of the experts meetings and discussing the disposition of comments and making sure we're providing the feedback for the adoption of the next version of the standard. I think that's it for me. So next is Dave Hawes, and he'll have more interesting talk. So.
We're going to get a little bit into the weeds, and I apologize ahead of time for kind of our conventions in the way we talk about the modules and the queues, and we also have several paths going on at the same time, so I'm going to try to dissect kind of where we are right now and what our plans are for 2025. There's been a lot of work over the past number of years, kind of recently, particularly this calendar year, addressed at the queue problem. And I don't think there's probably a conversation I have that doesn't work its way into at some point and recognize the significance of it in lots and lots of ways. Other things come up and the length of the queue and the time that it takes to go through that, the inconsistencies of that as well, have large ramifications. So this is a real serious focus. We've got to keep other things moving, the post-quantum things as an example, but certainly over the next year and a half or so, a lot of focus is going to be going toward resolving and working on the queue issues. So the good news is we feel like some of those things that we've been working on and putting in place are finally having an effect. And so you can see this is a chart that shows the number of published certificates, by month over the past year or so, and you can see some fairly significant spikes at the end. The red color are interim certificates, and again in our nomenclature, BR1 refers to modules that are meeting the new SP 800-140 BR1 standard that has to do with the documentation and the format of information presented. And so some of those have been happening too. There's a pilot project that's been going on in that new format, so we've got a few of those validated. But you can see also, we're focusing on kind of the traditional or the existing 140-3 queue. So in the past few months, that's kicked up too. We've made a commitment to working on the modules, particularly that were in coordination later in the process, and we're getting some of those through. So again, we finally feel like we have some good news to present. So, the kind of work to date on these different streams of modules coming through. So the first thing is interim validations or validations that have an interim caveat in them. There have been, as of last week, when we prepared the slides, 145 modules where the vendors selected this particular path. So that's really exciting to us. Back in January when we first started talking about this, and then had several meetings with the community and got feedback and adjusted it. It took till about June, kind of work through getting that to happen. But we're pretty excited and thankful for kind of the community support in embracing the unknown and going forward with this. And that's 145 out of about 200 or so that were eligible. So a pretty significant number, and this has been really key to help us beginning to kind of dig out of this. So we've got 63 completed. So you saw some of the red ones in that previous slide. So 63 validations completed. A bunch of these we're waiting on kind of the final checklist update. That's a part of the process for people to get in, and you know, we don't see any issue kind of getting through these in our time frame. I'm not going to go through every number, and we have about 5 minutes left. The good news is, well, the bad news is we're going to go over a little bit. The good news is that our presentation is next, so we're just eating into our own time. So I'm not going to go over every number, but specifically, this category of pre-BR1, as we call it, 140-3 modules submitted prior to the 1st of January, not in this new format. We had about 55 that was in this kind of coordination state. We finished 15. You know, we have different statuses of them. The important number there is the last one, you know, the ones that are still kind of in this backlog. And so about 9 of those left to get through. And again, we have some numbers associated with a few of the modules going through the BR1 pilot project. So we're looking at kind of 2 phases here. The first one is the next few months through the remainder of 2024. And so we've got those 9 left in coordination. We want to get through those by the 1st of November. And then we have this set of what we call pre-BR1, you know, the ones that didn't select interim, 28 in that category now. And our target is to get through, in this case, when I say we get through them, I'm talking about our initial review. So our, you know, NIST and CCCS's initial review that gets the first set of comments, you know, back to the lab as we track kind of our metrics and what moves the validation process along. You know, that's, at this point, that's a huge part of the backlog. So as we're thinking about what's happening, that's what we're talking about, not finished validations for these. But, you know, that's probably the biggest part to move these along. So we're looking at getting through, we have 28 now left in this category because the interim validation, you know, program was so successful that has has shrunk this number and created what we feel like is a manageable number to get through this calendar year. So here's our graph shrinking the backlog 2024. The yellow is kind of the backlog numbers. The blue in the high in the tall bars are the kind of new modules that are being added to the backlog in this new BR1 format. So basically, you know, things submitted in 2024. And the shorter graphs are, you know, the initial review set that we're working through to try to get through it. So as you can see, you know, the plan is to get through, you know, all the modules submitted in this pre-BR1 format and the interims, you know, through the course of this calendar year, and that would leave us with, you know, the BR1, you know, format modules starting in 2025. So, you know, again, we've made a part of this is projection, but a good part of this is history. So again, we're feeling good about that. We've made lots of promises, we feel like, certainly over the past months and years about the queue, and are excited to see some actual progress that we can present instead of just talking about promises. And so 2025, you know, what are we looking at? In thinking through where are we going to be at the end of 2025. So we have an estimate of, you know, new, you know, modules that are going to come in. You know, what is our backlog going to be, you know, as we end 2024? How many are going to be have been submitted through the course of 2024 that are going to kind of start this backlog. We have 58 in the queue right now, and we sent an email out to all the labs and asked for estimates on kind of the remaining calendar year, how many submissions, full submissions they were going to have to add to this queue. And we took the high values of each of those estimates. So if there were examples of like, oh, maybe 10 to 15, we picked the 15 number. And so that says another 130, modules from now to the end of the calendar year. Twice as many that have already been submitted. So we're a little, we think it's a high number, but we want to look at, and in some sense, kind of the worst case scenario in terms of what our backlog is and what we would get through. So we would start the year, we'd start January with 188 in the queue. And then we have to look at what's going to get added to that. We have to estimate, over the course of this next calendar year, how many new modules are going to be coming in. This slide says 12 per month. That was kind of before we got the estimates. So in the chart that you're going to see, it's actually 20 per month. So we start with 188. We get 20 new ones per month coming in. We have revalidations to do. We have these BR1 updates to the existing interim modules. That was a hard number to try to sort through and figure out how many of those were going to be coming in. There's a 2-year time period, for those to be submitted, and we picked, again, fairly arbitrarily, 6 to 8 per month of the BR1 updates that would come in. We're trying to get an idea of what is our workload in terms of getting these initial reviews done. So what that means is, what would it take to get through to reduce the backlog through the calendar year 2025, so that we end 2025 without a backlog? And what that means is we start with about 24 initial reviews. Again, that's what I'm talking about, getting it out to the labs per month, increasing up to about 48 in May. And we know the other big part of the validation time relates to coordination activities. We get comments back, and you provide responses to comments, and we get to it. And so we're committing to a level of responsiveness. In that there are always going to be some issues that come up, but if we can get 90% of our comment response rounds back in 7 days. And again, this all presumes a level of quality in terms of the modules that are coming in. And so what does that look like in a graph? Again, this probably doesn't translate well, but the high bar in the graph is the backlog. And we start with 188. Based on the projections that we have, and the shorter bar is the number of initial reviews, and that moves from the numbers I had before, 25 up to 48 over the course of the first 3 or 4 months, and that gets us down to a queue without a backlog at the end of 2025. So that's our plan. And we recognize that that's going to take a level of commitment from us to have the report review process meet the timeline. And so we've done lots and lots and lots of talking and discussion relative to making this happen. And committing to this. And I started with talking about the issues associated with the queue, and we think in terms of how we can focus our efforts on this program, getting the queue down over the course of this next calendar year is a pretty big priority for us. So that's the kind of end of our first set, where we are, 5 minutes behind. So I think what I'd like to do, instead of breaking it up, if that's okay, take questions now, and then get back into it and take another set of questions. Maybe we can just roll to, the next presentation talking about the future and save our question time for the end. So I'm going to turn it over back now to Kailai to start talking about what the future is going to look like.
So, when we were developing the slides, we weren't thinking the slides are going to be connected like this. So obviously, when Dave was talking, I noticed that there wasn't much people movement. So I assume I can be very certain that most of you have heard the numbers and everything. So jump and know who we are. So I'm going to just jump right in. And there aren't a lot of slides. There are about 7 or 8. So I'm confident that we're going to be finished talking them in about 15, 20 minutes or so. Leave plenty of time for questions and more. Or I like to qualify that as maybe a conversation so we have some ideas I want to put on the table and solicit your feedback at the same time. Inform you and solicit feedback. So challenges, we're going to talk about briefly challenges, report review and the queue, guidance gap, transitions, ISO 19790-2024, then longer term, post 2025, and then questions. So challenges, and if you look at the slides, we kind of qualify here as a near term. Near term time frame is from now, or any time during 2024, runs to December 2025. And as Dave just minutes ago mentioned that the programs, yes, when we talk about CMVP current, and there are so many activities that they're all important, necessary to support this operation. But the priority will be, we're going to make sure that we have the priority right, and the priority will be on the queue and trying to reduce the queue backlog. And the other one is throughout the year next year, we're going to address the guidance gap, and we'll talk about that briefly. Longer term, I'm going to jump to ISO. So we will talk about ISO 19790-2024. It's coming, I guess momentarily, imminently. Now, we have received questions about, so what, as CMVP, what's your plan about ISO 19790-2024? So at least what we'll do here is offer our thoughts about this standard and how we plan to go about it. And longer term, post 2025. I think it makes sense for us to, in the past at SCMC, we provide those high-level slides meant for those who are new to the program and run them through and a quick update of the queue. We've done so, and I think it's important that, as Dave said, we set ourselves a goal, and the immediate goal end of next year is to try to bring down the queue to make it management level, preferably 0, right? But it's important that for us as a program to look forward. What do we want the program to be in the future? So we'll talk about that briefly. Now, since you were all here, I don't think I need to talk too much about it. 2024, so finished interim. So we have 2 timelines. October 1st, that's the timeline for vendors to contact your labs, let the program know that you have the intention, you plan to have your module to go to the interim route. So October 1st, we need to hear from you if you are still hesitating. Then the second timeline is a December 1st? 31st? First. Yeah. Okay. December 1st. So December 1st, what this timeline is that, yes, you have let the program know your intention, and you have to work with the labs, and your labs will need to go through the checklist we send them and verify and make sure that all is in order and you have checked this and that, and send that second version to us so that we can proceed with the interim processing. So our plan is December 1st, so we aim to have that, even though with the holidays and New Year, we intend to do our best to get the interim modules processed Pre-BR1 are those modules prior January 1st, 2024. And for those, there are some modules, there are a number of them. And it is our intention to, when we say completion here in this context, it's not to get to the final certificate, is to finish our review and send our comments back to the labs. We do plan to, by end of 2024, we have a couple months left and to finish those review of those modules. Then 2025, of course, you saw the charges now. We have a fairly good number of 140BR1 modules, revalidation modules, and we have, when we talk about the FIPS 140-3 queues, where there are a number of queues. But our focus will be, we want to get started with the BR1. Obviously, the 140 BR1, the capability is deployed, it's running, and everything works. We continue to receive feedback. We will continue to, based on the feedback, adjust, improve the module information, improve definition, improve the web cryptic BR1, and send out the guidance as needed. And of course, the security, that includes security policy creation, all those system capabilities and process that we just talked about. Now, 2025, to actually work through those modules during the year, to bring the backlog down, we also needed to look into a new review process, a sustainable review process. Remember, here we're looking at a combined a team of about 14 members. So in addition to the cryptographic module reviews, there are many other activities. We need to look at ourselves and say how much can we do, and where do we add value. So we start the conversation. We're going to look at what this sustainable review process is. And what we can say at this point is that this sustainable review process is predicated on a number of things, building and increasing basis of trust. And what we mean by that is this trust is evidenced by the information quality. So that trust also goes two ways. So the second bullet here, timely, clear, and consistent guidance. So CMVP, we have recognized that in the past, we have, a lot of information come out from the program. We have information in our management manual. We have RFGs, we have implementation guidance. We have a module review comments. They're all some form of guidance. In the past, that perhaps worked well, but over the years with FIPS 140-3, with a number of modules, perhaps it's time to examine how we do things and make sure that we can offer timely, clear, and consistent guidance. So that's the part on the program we want to do better. And equally, we in return we receive quality information as well. So the new review process is really predicated on all these elements. Right? I talk about, keep on saying, we'll do better, organization, communication improvements. So I mentioned we recognize there are issues, there's room for us to improve. The guidance is another one that we have a running list of guidance that we need to develop. We need to get to them, but we need to also look at the list and prioritize which ones to tackle. So we need to actually sit down to identify a set of criteria to help us make that decision so that we can address largest, most significant the gaps. And what do we mean by largest? What do we mean by most significant? We need to define that. So all in all, we as a program, we want to be better. And that's easy to say. And when anyone can say we want to be better. So we need to define that. And in a few slides, we're going to talk about, we're going to lay out some ideas as what we think when we say the program is better post-2025. And when we say better, I think I can say that not only when we get to accomplish those goals, I think we can say that not only the CMVP program is better, but the ecosystem is better as well. Address transitions. So at this point, I'll pass the floor to Alex to talk about those specific ones.
All right, thank you, Kailai. All right, so we promised some time for questions, and I see that we're pretty much have about 10 minutes left before that. So I'll probably go, of course, I promised this last time, but I'll probably go pretty quickly here. So as far as, gaps and guidance, and Kailai pretty much touched on a lot of what, the same sort of thoughts that I was going to sort of cover in a sense of, we have processes already in place. We have IGs, the process well-defined, a formal process there. We have requests for guidances. We interact directly with the community. We collaborate. We have, a feedback loop there, and we, in fact, get a lot of suggestions and IG requests from, the community. The CMUF has provided some, groundwork for a lot of the IGs and work that, we eventually publish. So that's, there's a lot of good that's happening as far as, that goes and guidance goes, but then obviously there is, a layer of our own understanding of, as we unravel things, gap areas pop up, and we have our own kind of running list of items that we know could use some more clarification. And transitions are kind of one example of guidance that we recognize, we could be better at, having sort of a front loading, work where we can get guidance prepared, better so that, once these submissions come in, that it, have some certain algorithms that are being transitioned into or whatnot. We can be better prepared for that and have a more consistent set of, modules representation of those algorithms, et cetera. So, post-quantum is and I talked about that already. That's one, I think, example of a success where we did work ahead of time. We looked at the draft of the FIPS, and we worked with the community and coming up with, the different requirements that's necessary in order to come up, adopt those post-quantum algorithms into a validation. SHA-1 is another example. FIPS, the FIPS 140-2, historical, being historical September 2026, another example. And then even kind of looking at, ASCON and the, lightweight crypto, as those drafts come out, we'll need to continue to do those sort of upfront work to prepare us better for that. As far as, ISO 2024, there's going to be a talk about this, I think at 2 o'clock today, or is it 4 o'clock? I think it's 4 o'clock today. There's a panel on, ISO 19790 2024, and, we'll have, CMVP members there, and Carolyn, editor, and kind of talk about some thoughts there. But as far as, so this slide goes, it's more just a highlight of, we recognize, this is an important transition. There's a lot of good and important sort of clarifications and solving some ambiguities within, that standard. And we recognize that, there's a balance between jumping into it too soon and sort of getting our, sort of nightmares of sort of FIPS 140-3 in some sense of, we don't want to get to that position of, always working sort of backwards or catching up essentially with our own sort of transitions. We want to make sure we're thinking ahead of time, having the right guidance in place before we get to that position. And so we recognize, as much as there are benefits to this next standard, we also recognize there's a lot of work that needs to be done for us to get to a place where we're going to smoothly transition to it and be able to do it, successfully and not, create sort of a recurring issue of queue and guidance, cycles. So I think that's kind of the majority of my covering sort of, obviously, once we see, the implementation of the standard, we saw this with 1540-3, we can come up with guidance in advance, and we did that. We worked with the CMUF very well, and we came up with a lot of gap areas and came up with guidance, but then once these things were actually implemented and tested and part of, submitted to our program, we realized, those gap areas continue to pop up, and there just needs to be a better way for us to sort of, adjust those gap areas and bring it back into the validation process. And so those are definitely areas that we're paying extra close attention to short term and into 2025. So I think that covers my talk. I'll pass it over to Dave.
So beyond 2025, 2025 being the Q and kind of incremental improvements. So we're going to have the NCCOE project and begin implementing some of the results of that. I won't spend time kind of going into the details here because you'll be able to hear about that kind of specifically later in the conference. But the big points is, there are already some results of that we've been able to take and work into our current processes. We're staying in close communication with that group, and we're going to continue to roll along with that and see that as a part of our future. And then just generally other incremental improvements in what we call the module information structure and comments documents, and probably other ideas that we've had in terms of taking advantage of kind of the platform of structure that we've been working on creating more recently here. And then just at a really high level, other things, what are we thinking about in terms of the future beyond? Funding and staffing, consistency with that. We've had bumps, in the road that have affected us, and so we need to work. Obviously, we're a federal government agency and are affected by all of those things, both of us. So we need to think that through. We really recognize the significance and importance of consistent, reliable, visible timelines. And so that's something we're going to continue to work on. In these other things as well, we attended the formal methods workshop that was held recently, and are going to be looking at the outcomes and participating in that as well, into the future. So just some kind of big ideas or big thoughts in relationship so that some of the things that we're thinking about. So that's it. So we've got at least a few minutes left here for questions. Yeah, there are microphones, so I think it'd be best to step up to a microphone and so it can be caught in the recording as well as Oh, I don't hear it.
Okay, go ahead.
Check.
There we go.
I would say thank you so much. Very informative presentation. So just wanted to clarify, so for modules that have received interim FIPS 140-3 validation, when do you expect that there will be ability to submit a BR1 update for those? And then once that happens, what do you expect the order processing queue priority to be?
So I would say, when we expect to be able to receive them, a month or two, like we're looking at the priority of getting through the 2024 stuff in the slides that you saw before. The processing order, we have a whole bunch in the queue. Like we have a whole bunch of BR1 modules, like new ones that have been submitted. We haven't gone into kind of detailed discussions about how those two are going to work out. We feel at least less of a sense of urgency for the BR1 updates because they are validated modules. We recognize there are a couple revalidation scenarios that are not available, and that's probably at the crux of getting the BR1 update, so we need to think through some of those things.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Should be a quick question. So what's the average length of time for a hardware module on the queue now, and what do you expect that to be after the end of 2025 when you've got the burn down?
Right. So we've sorted through kind of time frames associated with that. What's pretty difficult to give a final validation time frame is that we don't control that process. We don't control the start to the end of it. So there are two main points that we control, and we think those are the metrics that we're going to look at, we're going to focus on, and we're going to deliver, which are the initial review, is there a backlog, so the time from submission till the initial review, and then the turnaround time on coordination. And then there's a place where it hits the lab, and there could be coordination between the lab and the vendor to get it back to us. That's the part that we have no control over to define the length of that time. So I think instead of trying to come up with, like, how long is it going to take each lab to respond to the set of comments and do updates, like, we have no idea, and we've seen that all over the map. So I would say our goal is to have, things into review immediately within a month. That's what to us no backlog means. Ultimately it means we're waiting for modules to show up. And then the coordination, number I presented, that we would get coordination rounds out within 7 days for 90% of the modules. So it doesn't give a time frame, but if there's a few set of comments, they come in. I mean, it could be, a couple months, but part of that depends on the lab and that circumstance.
We've got some work under review by you currently. A recent decision you guys have made in June have really put a hamper on our work. You've recently decided that, and I'll try to get this correct, that TPM modules that are certified under FIPS 140-2 may no longer be used in FIPS 140-3 submissions. You did that in June. So currently the state is that you can use FIPS 140-2 modules, obviously under FIPS 140-2 if it exists. I think there's an extremely limited number of TPM modules that have achieved a FIPS 140-3, but what that does is puts a jam on development and new modules that you have. Currently, based upon your rule set, you're allowed to take private X509 keys and stick them under no encryption on a hard drive, because you can do a FIPS 140-3 level 3, but if I wanted to use a FIPS 140-3 TPM module, that's not allowed. So there is a radical reduction in security that NIST has demanded of users, saying, please keep your keys in the clear, don't use our FIPS 140-2 TPM modules. I'm unsure if NIST understands that decision that they've made in June and the ramifications to our existing submissions. But I wanted to bring that to your attention. I'm not sure if that's...
Thank you. I think we could follow up with you and kind of get the specifics of it as opposed to me addressing it, that particular item up here. I mean, I see it as a effect of the queue. One of the significant negative effects of having a long queue is not being able to get updates to things. So can we talk about that separately?
Sure.
Yeah. Looks like we got about 2 minutes left.
All right. My question was in regards to, I guess, the BR1 pilot projects that have already been reviewed. In your opinion, do you think that they are pretty in line with the average reports that are coming in terms of having a good predictable timeline? If all the BR1 pilot projects are very simple in scope and very small, that could skew things. So I was curious if you felt those pilot projects are good data to draw point for all the other projects.
Yeah, so I would say we've definitely seen a benefit from it. Certainly we don't have enough data points, and the projections of kind of review turnaround is not based exclusively on the benefit of the kind of BR1 coming out. It's in addition, I think we know, it's going to be more than that, right? So it's going to be more than just the benefits that we get BR1 to be able to deal with the backlog, in the course of 2025. So we've seen some benefit. It's going to take more than 5, 10 data points and examples to get through that. Go ahead.
Okay.
Les.
I'm of the impression that many vendors will try to convert their interims to full validations with the BR1 format. If that's going to be an influx of more BR1 work to the CMVP, do you anticipate another surge of work and influx, or is that something that you had considered already?
Given the date expiration is 2 years, so if there is an influx, like the only time we thought about that happening is around the 2-year point from now. But we haven't solicited input on exactly when people think they're going to come in. It's 145 total. We don't think all of them are going to have BR1 updates. So, the only way at this point we've accounted for it is that kind of 6 to 8 per month view over the next couple years. So we don't think it would be huge at the point 2 years from now, and we feel like we'd be equipped for it. Certainly better. All right, thanks so much.
Policy 5 and equivalency updates. We have John Rolf, Director of NIAP, and also Ed Morris from Gossamer talking. So they just disappeared. What happened? Hey! Okay, well, I'm not good at dancing on stages, waiting. And that's okay.
I know, that's what I was expecting. But times change. Okay, as I was prepping for this, so I got thrown into this a little late in the game, but I've been talking to, and the second slide here will go over some of the people who are involved in this project. Part of it was just trying to be transparent in what we're trying to do to improve some of our policies and publications. In this case, we wanted to talk about equivalency, and the hope is, we'll talk later in there, towards the end of this year, we'll update that, make it more clear, make it easier as people try to submit packages, that they will understand, what we're looking at, what would make it easy to come in and show equivalency between processors, on cryptographic algorithm validation. So, as I mentioned, I'm John Rolf, I'm the Director of NIAP. We have Ed Morris here from Gossamer. He's been, he'll talk, cut in on the slide when you want to talk on your topics. Basically on this topic. So we have some time at the end if you have any questions as we try to finalize, what that is. Let me. Green, okay. Okay, so some of the people who have been looking at this, it's been groups, of people we deal with. The person at NIAP, Lashia Few, has been managing Policy 5. She's been doing the analysis of the packages that come through, making the determination, is it equivalent? We have people historically who have done this previously. Diane Hale's here at the conference as well, if you want to get some history and talk about, where we came from. Part of the challenge is the complexities of the processors have gotten more and more convoluted, and there'll be a slide in here in the versioning, what it means to be a certain processor family, what it means to be, consistent. People dig deeper into the noise, into the instruction set, equivalency, the cryptographic, special instructions. So, again, we wanted to put this group together. Again, our goal is really, it is to simplify the process and make sure when you come in, it's easier for us to determine as well. So, when we have these opportunities, the goal is to share and to get some feedback. And after the discussion, whether it's me or whether it's Ed, have the discussion and say, yeah, that was stupid what you said up here, or you should really consider this. Again, we roll these out and try to get to a point where we don't have to worry about this, and we can worry about some of the more complex things like updating protection profiles and the post-quantum algorithms and things like this. So getting back, Lashia Few is the lead. Dr. Jade Stewart has been digging into, again, in this area, it's primarily the Intel processors and the equivalency in that area. We've worked with Dr. Michael Smeltzer at Johns Hopkins, one of our validator groups, and Justin Fisher, who puts a lot of our work in common criteria, who is sourced out of Leidos. Other areas that we look at, that was kind of focused on what we're doing with Policy 5, not NIAP's guidelines, and what we're looking for as we make those decisions so we can get the products on the list. In the equivalency update and looking specific at equivalency, it's again Jade Stewart from my office, Mike Smeltzer, Johns Hopkins, and Ed here at Gossamer. So, as we look at the processor equivalency, as far as in NIAP evaluations, there's a very simple policy out there that calls for what we would look for. And again, as I mentioned earlier, we're focusing right now on the Intel x86 to try to simplify that. In the future, we can look at things like the hypervisors and Java VMs. There are words in the policy today that talk about, what we expect to see in those areas, but again, those are complex as well. So it takes somebody on the back end to look and make sure the documentation is correct. In the discussion today, we're not going to dig deeper into common criteria evaluation. This is focusing on the U.S. Documentation submittal. Sure, please. Absolutely, break in anytime. Rena's go.
Okay, perfect. Let me adjust this. Can everyone hear me okay? Thanks very much, John. Just to kind of add on to what John said, and I'll draw some parallels with FIPS 140 because obviously this is ICMC, but this is NIAP's policy. As part of the certifications and the evaluations, NIAP allows you to test, let's say you have a family of models of network devices, for example. You can test one of them fully, and then the other ones you can claim equivalence for and not necessarily have to test them explicitly, provided that your equivalency argument is acceptable. And specifically, Policy 5 talks about the CAVP, the algorithm testing requirements for those. And in addition, there's clarifications for hypervisors as well as for Java virtual machines and kind of how that equivalency plays out. This presentation here will just be talking about CAVP, and it also doesn't cover, exactly as John mentioned, the rest of the common criteria testing, so protocol testing, management testing, log testing, and things like that. It's kind of interesting to note, I think, from a laboratory or vendor perspective, if you're looking at FIPS 140 and if you're looking at NIAP common criteria, FIPS doesn't really have a concept of equivalence, except in a couple of cases. One is the hardware equivalence IG that does allow you to draw some equivalences between hardware models, provided that you follow that IG and do the requisite testing. And then the other equivalence that I think FIPS offers is for software products. You can vendor affirm an operational environment. And as part of that, you don't really need to do that much as a vendor. You're doing your testing, your unit testing, and kind of attesting to that yourself. But there's no requirements from the CMVP on cryptographic algorithm testing. And so there's a bit of a difference in looking at equivalency between the two programs. So we're going to be talking just about NIAP and CAVP algorithm equivalency, and specifically on Intel processors. So exactly as John mentioned, Policy 5 here, this is the current policy. You can see sort of the highlights are that the policy requires that one member of the product family, if you will, one model, has to be fully tested, including having a CAVP certificate that matches to that product. So if we take a network device that's got OpenSSL under the hood, we're expecting that one of the devices, let's suppose there's a series of processors, small, medium, and large, one of them will have a CAVP algorithm certificate for that OpenSSL embedded library running on that specific CPU. The policy does allow for equivalency arguments to be made, and Jade had put together here Fact 16 kind of qualifies what you have to do to make that equivalency argument. Some of the highlights are same microarchitecture between the different CPUs, and in addition it calls out the same family and series and the same family to be displayed. So There's a bit of intricacy in that, and we'll explore that in the coming slides for what it's like as a vendor, as a lab, as well as perhaps as a validator to look at those. The first thing that we note is that the names are overloaded. So if you've delved into this at all and you've tried to look at this, and this problem actually dates back quite a long time ago. NIST had a, Harold Booth was participating in an early CPU equivalency group, maybe 10 years or so, and there were a lot of industry players as well. So this is some of that same work carried forward. But if you look into the Intel processors, and if you go by Intel's own marketing literature, the Intel Arc, for example, if you find perhaps the microarchitecture Sandy Bridge, you can see there's a lot of different versions of that. It's not just Sandy Bridge. You've got Sandy Bridge EP, Sandy Bridge EN, and just Sandy Bridge without any qualification. So the question arises, are these all the same microarchitecture? Are they considered equivalent? Should these be considered equivalent? And in addition, you have the concept of families from Policy 5. What are those families? Is it Xeon? Is it Core i5? Is Core i5 the same as Core i9? So here we can see, digging into a little bit more detail, the different, let's take Sandy Lake as an example, and you can see that there's different generations, and unfortunately the marketing names have changed a little bit in terms of what they are. Earlier had Xeon E5, E3, later ones step into Intel's scalable. You've got scalable gold and silver. Are those equivalent? Are they different? Should they be tested? If you look across multiple generations as well, on the left you can see the code names. The CPU architecture is in the third column, and then we've also, Jade had put in the lithography and the year that this was released. So you can see that Sunny Cove, for example, released in 2019, it's a 10 nanometer lithography, and both Ice Lake and Ice Lake SP were based on that. If I were to look at that, I would say that Ice Lake is probably the microarchitecture, but is that different from Ice Lake SP? That's really the kind of the heart of this as you try and make these equivalency claims or evaluate one. And then finally, even within a given processor family, so here's Xeon E5, which I would say is a good processor family, you can look at the different generations of it, and they have different code names. So Sandy Bridge EP, and then Sandy Bridge EP again appears in a V2 version. But yet that's actually a different generation, and the lithography has changed from 32 nanometers down to 22 nanometers. So that kind of signals a difference there. If we advance one more generation, you can see it's codenamed Haswell now, but it's still 22 millimeters. And if you followed Intel's lithography history, if you will, they had a tick-tock process where they would scale down to a smaller lithography and then stabilize on that for one more generation. But that's changed over time as it's become increasingly difficult to actually shrink the lithography. And nowadays, I don't think Intel actually lists explicitly the nanometers for their lithography, but provides sort of a translation of it, further complicating things. So, okay. So, as part of the work, and again, as John mentioned, John's here, but neither Mike Smeltzler nor Jay could be here. So I'm kind of presenting on behalf of the group, work that was done. But the group had come up with a refinement to the existing Policy 5. And that refinement's a very small one, which is just to add into the policy that the lithography be the same. This is a fairly benign addition, and I think it helps to cut through a little bit of the marketing ambiguity if you add that in as well, because it does help differentiate generations as long as there was a step in lithography. Aside from that, there's the additional task that the group took on, which was to look at the instruction sets underneath the CPUs and to see how those affected things. So right now it's just a refinement, but what the group has also been looking at is instruction sets. So using that current methodology, you can see here, we're going to try and create an equivalency argument, Xeon E5 2620. The current way to do this, both as a lab or a vendor, as well as for a validator, is to go to Intel's Arc, look it up, and then find what the product family is, Xeon E5, and then find what the microarchitecture is. So Sandy Bridge EP, for example, or Sandy Bridge. And then match that with the lithography, that's the additional portion, and you can make your equivalency argument. So as part of the work to do this, the digging through the Intel Arc is not very rewarding because you're kind of changing marketing names and trying to interpret it and trying to come up with a reasonable approximation of are these processors actually equivalent. And a different way to approach that is actually to look under the hood and just ask the processor itself. Intel processors and AMD processors support a CPU ID, and that instruction will return back to you all of the different flags or the instruction set extensions that are supported. And so we embarked on an exercise as part of the group to take a bunch of processors to actually read out the CPU ID information and then to see how those processors differed or were the same based on their instruction set capabilities across different generations, across different microarchitectures, and across different families, if you will. A Core i5 versus a Xeon E5 or a Xeon Scalable. What we found was that in general, obviously different steppings, different bins of CPUs will have different cache sizes. The number of cores that are enabled will vary as well. But in terms of the instruction set architecture, typically within the same microarchitecture and the same family, those two processors will share an identical set of instruction set extensions. And so some of the work that Mike did was to take those and lay them against each other and then compare them as we did. This slide here, it's a bit fine print, but what you can see is that a subset of those instructions, perhaps there's about 1,000 lines of output related to this instruction supported for a given CPU, and laid those side by side, a subset of those, and then mapped whether they were identical in green or whether they were different, which is the white. And what we found is that by the current policy 5, it effectively translates to an identical instruction set across both CPUs. And case 2 was looking at taking that a step further and saying, okay, there's a lot of instructions. Do all those instructions really matter to crypto? No, probably not. What is a set that does matter? And Mike had put together that set and then, based on that set, seen which, in fact, were equivalent and which weren't. And you can see here, in fact, it's a little bit hard to see, but later you could see in columns 4 and 5, they are, in fact, equivalent, even though they're silver and gold, which are different, potentially different families, you might argue. And in addition, you can see in columns 2, 3, and 6, we're able to get equivalence between different generations, Cascade Lake and Sky Lake, suggesting that, in fact, by targeting and looking at instruction sets, you can claim legitimately greater equivalence between processors. So as I mentioned, Mike, to put together this list, he reviewed the different lists, and he had started with the Intel intrinsics. He also looked at OpenSSL, which is one of the open source libraries that makes great use of the CPU ID and the differences in instruction sets, as well as Xeon Scalable crypto extensions. And this superset that he created took into account all of these and said these are likely the instructions that would matter if you're looking at cryptography and instruction set differences. We discussed that this list is a starting point and that it would really need to be updated as new instructions are released and perhaps clarified depending upon which crypto libraries surface making use of them or not. The third case that we discussed, and I should also mention that Kevin Machichi's CPU equivalency group is a working group under CMUF, is looking at some of the same topics as well. And case 2 and case 3 mapped fairly well to the CPU working groups. Case 4, which is hardware agnostic, relates to this, and cases 2 and 3 relate to case 2 here. Numbering's a bit conflicting, but so we've kind of tentatively or colloquially referred to this as a red hat approach. Yaroslav's in the audience, so his contributions are appreciated. and even AtSec performing some of the validation work. This approach seeks to perform CAVP testing such that it's now hardware agnostic, meaning that once the testing is complete, in theory, you should be able to draw CPU and CAVP equivalents between any other processor after the testing's been done. The process basically requires knowledge of the library that's being used, understanding which instructions it actually branches on, if it's present or if it's absent, and then performing testing. In the case of OpenSSL for Red Hat, it was through pound-defined preprocessor definitions in order to force given branches, and then testing on a superset CPU. So it's a little bit involved, but the benefit is that for a pure software vendor that's really hardware agnostic, your OS or your cryptographic libraries can be fully vetted, and thus anyone else should be able to reuse those certificates. So that's something that's still being discussed and kind of looked at to make sure that that's been thought through from, in different aspects. Yep. So I'll turn back over to you, John, because I'm not NIAP.
Okay. So I'm glad I have Ed here who could summarize the group. That's not my depth of knowledge. But as far as what we're doing at NIAP, I can speak to that. We're looking at updating the frequently asked questions based on case 2 and case 3, as Ed had talked about. The policy 5 frequently asked question updates are there for the refining to clarify the current cases. As Jade's put here, empirical cases, comprehensive case, and we'll also look at the hypervisor and Java VM for maybe some small tweaks. But the goal here is to have these out by the end of the year. Again, give you some insight to what the group's done. Again, the goal, as I said earlier, is just to make this more clear, easier, so there's not the back and forth to try to get this, agreed to. As Ed mentioned, we have to have one case certified through the fifth process, but after that, the equivalency becomes a very big thing for the vendors, as we know. There's a backup slide? Okay, absolutely.
I'm not sure if there's any questions. Please.
So this is less a question and more of a comment. My name is Rachel Parker, and I work at Intel, and I've been the lead technologist for the digital random number generator for the last several years. For a frame of reference, I was DJ's manager, so lots of you know DJ. And so one thing I want to say is there's a new mailing address, FIPS office at intel.com. So if you have questions about equivalency or FIPS, please feel free to use that. That's the new kind of official. We established what we call a center of excellence inside the company to gather all the FIPS experts. And so if you want your questions answered, that's a great way to start. With regards to the equivalency stuff, I can't really speak to all of the features that you listed there, but for the digital random number generator, I can discuss equivalency going all the way back to the first ones. I took over the design starting just before Ice Lake, and I've owned it since then, but I had to learn it, and deal with the past versions of it. And one of the challenges I see moving forward is, you mentioned lithography, but lithography only matters when you consider the physical noise source. So I wasn't really sure how much you were talking about using lithography as just another data point to try to figure out which processors were the same microarchitectures.
Yeah, more towards that.
But, obviously, going into this in detail is beyond the scope of a Q&A, and you guys are welcome to flag me while I'm here or email me. But specifically with ESV and the DRNG, there's a big challenge right now in terms of figuring out equivalency. Those of you that are familiar with our entropy report, you'll see in the beginning there's a table where we say all of these processors are the same for the purposes of this ESV. And I'm getting a lot of questions from labs hey, can you provide some statement demonstrating that they're the same?
Some
How do you know they're the
justification or
same,
some evidence,
right? And that's really problematic because the way that these designs are done is you have an IP, that gets put onto many different products, right? And then those products have many different configurations, like either, they'll more or less cache, or they'll enable or disable features. And there's this kind of false sense of, I don't know, if you go look at the ESV process, right? Like, you collect data on a part or a couple parts, and it completely overlooks the fact that all analog circuits behave with a statistical distribution that's determined by the processing technology. And, so it's kind of like, hey, show that all these are the same, and then send us data from one. It gets very confusing, and I've got a lot of thoughts on that, and I'm trying to work with the FIPS COE team to come up with better guidelines on equivalency. So anyways, that's just my 2 cents, and feel free to ping me if you want to talk about equivalency for the DRNG itself.
Yeah, no, thank you very much. I think Garrett had participated in the group, and even back 10 years ago, we had some participation from Intel, so we definitely welcome that. I should have clarified, I think I have a slide that kind of shows this. We weren't talking about ESV. ESV equivalency is its own. In this backup slide here, you can see the far right columns on this. This is how Gossamer sort of handles equivalency. This is actually a real case for one of our network device vendors. And you can see the first of the far right columns is entropy testing needed. In this case, it was a software-based noise source, not the bull run, not RD-RAN, RD-seed. So it was needed across all. But this presentation was really about CAVP, the software that's executing in the instruction sets that are supported. And you can see there was a little bit of equivalence there. And then there's even the other types of testing which weren't covered, firewall and CT testing as well. But thank you. But you're right that ESV and those hardware sources have their own considerations for equivalence, rather. So it's a rather overloaded topic. Yeah, no, I'll definitely follow. We have some thoughts on maybe some easy, lightweight ways to do that to get the information. Great.